Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst, and welcome back to my Salarycast. If you're not familiar with my work, a year ago when I started this channel, I would make these team-centric videos where I talked about hypothetical moves they can make, and I show my work and show all the CBA and salary cap minutia stuff they have to abide by. And now that we're past the lottery and we have a little bit more clarity on where teams stand, what they can do, I think it's time to start doing these again. And seeing how the Spurs just jumped up to the lottery, I think they're the first team to talk about. And as you can see in the bottom, I am going to show how they can just jumpstart their contention window, trade for a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who I think is the Spurs are probably the biggest contender to get him right now. They seem to have the most attractive package, and I'm sure they'll be one of his top preferences. And also go over what a Darren Fox extension could look like. That's going to be another big priority, and just how they could fill up the roster, show what the cap sheet will look like in the end. So it's just going to be some fun salary cap stuff. I also suggest you check the description. I have already covered the Spurs, where I had Noah Magaro George. He covers them on my podcast. We talked about them a couple months ago, so you get some good context there. And also I put a link to my preview on the Spurs where I talked about them, what their offseason could look like. I got into more details on a Fox extension, Sohan extension. So a couple other things that I don't really talk about in this video. You'll find it in that preview. But yeah, let's get to the actual video. So here's the Spurs' current cap sheet heading into the offseason. So biggest thing of note, they moved up from 8 to 2. That adds about $7 million to their payroll. Number 2 pick makes like a pretty good amount of money. They have the 14th pick. They're keeping that. Now marks a third year in a row where the Spurs not only keep a top 4 pick, but also moving up in the lottery. So very strong stretch of lottery luck for the Spurs. So even though their payroll jumped up a little bit with the results of the lottery, they still project to be under the first apron and, more importantly, the luxury tax. So you might be thinking, well, if they're going to trade for Giannis or an all-star like that, and why would they still want to deduct the tax? A couple of reasons. The main one is that when you're in the tax for 3 or 4 seasons, you become a repeater. That you get designated as a repeater. You pay higher tax rates in the future. So they still have Victor Wembanyama on their rookie deal, where he's basically making the mid-level. So they got to take advantage of that. They're going to try not to pay the tax, because eventually Wembanyama is probably going to get a max contract. If you're going to have potentially 3 max players on the roster, you're going to be paying tax. Best to delay starting that repeater tax so you can be in the tax later, if that makes sense. So that's the thing. Like, I'm sure it's not really necessarily about the money, but it just, practically speaking, if you can duck it right now, they should do it. It's also worth noting that the CBA, the new one in 2023, changed the rules where starting this upcoming season, the luxury tax rates are going to be much higher, starting like in some of the deeper you go, basically. I'm not going to get into the exact details, but yeah, so they're going to want, so especially if they are in the repeater tax, it's going to make those penalties way higher. So expect them to deduct the tax, and they will probably be able to, as I go through this, they're going to be able to field a pretty deep team and potentially trade for an all-star, all within staying under the tax. So last year they had cap space. They used some of it to sign Chris Paul. They traded for Harrison Barnes. This year they're most likely going to be an over-the-cap team. So they'll have the non-tax pyramid level exception, the biannual exception. You can see those amounts listed there. And they'll be able to re-sign their free agents. Here's some of them. The biggest one of note is Chris Paul. So they'll be able to use all these different types of avenues to deepen the roster while going over the cap. And the other thing is that they can increase their payroll in a trade. So unlike some teams that are already pretty expensive, they kind of have to do like dollar for dollar type trades. The Spurs don't need to do that. So they'll be able to increase their payroll and probably even use some of these other avenues I mentioned to deepen the roster and still stay within the tax. They could also engage in sign-in trades while staying below the first apron. All these things I just mentioned that they could do, it would all hard cap them below the first apron, but it won't really matter, because they're going to probably deduct the tax anyways. Now, as you look at the roster, they have plenty of salary matching they can do without having to save money and open up cap space between Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson. even Jeremy Sohan, perhaps Stephon Castle. They've got enough money to make a trade for a max player work. But so I'm going to get into what those combinations could be. I'll tell you I'll show you the type of combination I think the Spurs will end up trying to push for. But first, I want to get into a Darren Fox extension. So the Spurs acquired Darren Fox during the offseason for what I would consider was like almost very minimal value. And I think that kind of makes the possibility of, if there is a max contract already baked into it, bring him in. The fact that they gave up very little, I think, kind of helps with that. So he's eligible to extend the summer. It's a maximum of 4 years, projected about 229 million. Would be 30% of the max, starts out at 51 million and tops out at 63 million in his age 32 season. I highly suggest you guys do check out my Spurs preview on Third Apron from the description, because I get into I really dug into historical comparisons. I looked at guards that got max contracts on their third contracts, and comparatively, Fox is probably it's like far less accomplished than a lot of these guys. Guys like Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Steph Curry. There's more of them. What I'd be interested in knowing is if the Spurs could potentially negotiate him into something a little bit less in the max. A couple days ago, I released a Hawks offseason preview, and I talked about Trae Young's potential extension, and I came to the conclusion that I'm not sure there's going to be a max contract out there for him, and something that might make more sense is maybe something closer to like the 25% max, which is what he's already making. And I'm not here to compare Trae with Fox, but I do feel like they're in a similar tier where they probably shouldn't be making the full max, but I think like they should definitely still be making more what they're currently getting. So here is the projection that I made for Trae, and I think it's pretty applicable for Fox. He still makes more money than he ever has on each season. The money goes up each year, averages about 25% of the cap. And for the Spurs, they're getting about $8 million less a year on his contract, which could be a pretty big difference. It might not seem like that much, but when it comes to managing the cap in the future years, especially when they do enter the tax, it can make a meaningful difference in potentially having another player on the rotation without making the luxury tax bill go too crazy. Now, before I get into any hypothetical trade, I want to go over what the Spurs have to offer, mainly their first round picks, because after the Fox trade, they still have, in my opinion, a pretty good collection of valuable first-round picks. The only one of value that, in my opinion, they really gave up for Fox was the Wolves first in 2031. And they traded a Bulls first, which is back to the Bulls, which probably won't convey. So as you can see, they still have at least one first-round pick in every single draft through their next 7 seasons. The other one that I didn't mention they traded to the Kings was a 2027 first, their own. But they already have a 2027 unprotected from the Hawks coming in. So since they have a pick in every single draft, they don't have any restriction on which pick they can trade. They could technically, so every single pick at the moment is trade eligible. Now they can't trade them all. So the way I showed it is that I think the Spurs, based on how they approached the Darren Fox trade, I think they're going to try to keep all their players. I'm talking like Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, maybe even Harrison Barnes. I think they're going to try to keep all these guys, and in exchange, try to compensate for that by trading their draft picks. I just think that, if they're going to bring in Giannis, they're going to need some shooting, so they're going to want to keep Vassell and Barnes. I think it seems like they're very attached with Stephon Castle. He could be a very good point of attack defender one day, and that's just like another type of guy they don't have other than him on the roster. So after the draft is done, they make the 2 selections. They would be able then to trade a maximum of 4 additional picks, which would be in the even number years. So it'd be a 2026 first, a 2028 first, a 2030 first, and a 2032 first. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, the Spurs are going to be really good in the later years, most likely. Why should you get excited about getting those picks? And the thing is, they have done a really nice job accruing swaps over the years that adds a little more variability to the value of those first round picks. So in 2026, they have a Hawks swap next year. 2028, they have a swap with the Celtics, which, you know what, might be looking a little better now. 2030, they have swaps to get the most favorable of the Mavs and Wolves swap. So, in 2031, if they wanted to trade that one instead, they've got to swap with the Kings. So all of a sudden, you're not necessarily going to get locked into a Spurs pick potentially, but you might get another team's pick if one of those teams falter. So I don't know if the Spurs need to give all this up to have the best offer for Giannis, but I get the feeling they are going to prioritize trying to keep their guys and hopefully try to get something done with a big combination of these picks. So here's a type of scenario I could see the Spurs really pushing to try to acquire Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's a picks heavy package, allows them to keep all those guys I mentioned. Now, a couple things. First of all, this is just what I envision the Spurs are going to try to send out from their perspective. If they do end up getting Giannis, it's not going to be a 2-team trade. In all likelihood, it's going to be a 3 or 4-team trade with these various picks going to different teams where maybe the Bucks get some of them, but ideally the Bucks are also getting some players, some veterans or young players that they prefer from other teams. And these picks are going to those teams to get, whatever it is the Bucks want back. So something that could work, it's like they get the number 2 pick from the Spurs, maybe Sohan if they want him. And then they're also getting, some various other players from other teams. I'm just showing what the Spurs are mainly sending out on their end. So they need to send out a minimum of $43.1 million to match for Giannis's $54.1 million salary. It's within 25% of it. Now, one other thing is that this trade would have to be done at least on July 6th because that's a new salary cap year. However, this exact framework wouldn't be able to work until at least August 1st. And the main reason is because I've got them using the number 2 pick and the number 14 pick as part of the salary matching. Any first round pick that is signed cannot be used towards salary matching in a trade until 1 month after it's signed. So this is the big way the Spurs are able to inflate their salary while only sending out like Keldon Johnson mainly as their big salary piece to eventually make the money work. This is the same element that delayed the Kevin Love for Andrew Wiggins swap trade back in 2014. They had to wait for Andrew Wiggins' salary to have been signed for a month so they can use that towards the matching component for Kevin Love. So the Spurs are able to make up about a third of the salary just with their two first-round picks alone. Everyone else, for the most part, salary matching. I'm sure they would go to the other teams, but they get within 25% of Giannis's salary. They increase the payroll by only about $8 million. So they're now hard capped to the first apron. So let's take a look and see what the roster would look like. So as you can see, the Spurs really loaded up on their top 5 and 6 for next year, and they have a pretty deep bench, in my opinion. You've got Giannis at the max over here. You've got Fox making his max, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Wembanyama. And notice that I removed Blake Wesley as well, who I don't really think is going to be in their plans. So one thing they could do is trade him for a $10 million player. Another thing they could do is trade him to save money, maybe attach a couple second-round picks. They have a lot of second-round picks. I don't even know what the number is, but I know it's the highest in the league. And they save some money. They could open up using the non-tax pyramid level exception. I've got them only using about $10 million just so they can have some space to stay below the luxury tax. I left them about $2 million below the tax because Devin Vassell has some incentives that he could very well hit. And also just to have like an emergency signing in case something happens. So, just have that in their disposal. I also have them with their second round pick, number 38 overall. And yeah, so this is the type of roster I would imagine the Spurs are going to try to push for if they're going to acquire Giannis. Now, a couple things. I understand that it's probably unrealistic or more unlikely that they're going to be able to pull off a trade for Giannis without including some of these guys like Devin Vassell or Stephon Castle or Harrison Barnes. But at the same time, I'm also maybe those up to six first round picks. Maybe there is a combination of stuff they could do with other teams to satisfy the Bucks. Maybe they don't even need to give up that many picks to make something happen. So I feel like whether it does involve some of the other players that I have them keeping here or those picks, I think either pathway does have a path to get them Giannis. It's also kind of unrealistic that a team would want to wait a month to potentially acquire the number 2 pick. They wouldn't have him during summer league, and waiting a month to complete this trade could hold up other moves in free agency in general. So because of that aspect, yeah, there's probably a very good chance that they would have to get the trade done earlier, which means they might have to include a guy like Devin Vassell or Harrison Barnes, or maybe they can get Chris Paul involved in a sign and trade, some of their other free agents to help inflate the money, kind of like what the Knicks did in that Karl Anthony Towns trade last year. But this framework is just way more fun. I do want to circle back to the Fox extension to see how it impacts things for next year. Because if the Spurs do nothing else to add any long-term money, meaning they don't trade for an all-star, they don't really sign anyone else other than their first-round picks, mostly run it back, and the only thing they do is sign Fox, and let's just put him at a max salary for now. They would still have cap space next summer, something about like in the 30 million range, which isn't a lot, but it's just important to note because having the cap space is a way to leverage a trade than to actually sign someone nowadays. That's basically how they were able to get Darren Fox as early as they did, because he was going to be a free agent in 2026 and made it clear to the Kings that he was probably going to sign there once he hit free agency. So they were able to get that outcome now. So they could still leverage a trade for a different all-star later in case they don't trade for an all-star now. Obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo, he's signed. He's under contract through like 2028, I think. So, they wouldn't be able to leverage anything for him, but they could maybe get somebody else if they don't get anyone else right now. And now if we look at their payroll for next season, after acquiring Giannis Antetokounmpo, hypothetically, and I've got Fox signing that extension I suggested, they have their top 5 guys. Barnes is expired at that point, but with these guys, they are still having a pretty healthy cap sheet. They should still be able to avoid the luxury tax next season while fielding the rest of the team. They could run back a similar roster that I put back, resign guys like Harrison Barnes, whoever they used to sign with their mid-level exception. Maybe if Barnes isn't as effective anymore, they could have traded him by then. But either way, they have the avenue to run back a pretty the top heavy roster that I put together for this upcoming season and run it back for the next season as their last stay under the tax type season before Wembanyama, this would be his last year making his rookie deal, jumps into the max and pushes the Spurs payroll into a huge deep territory. I think the biggest thing from that point, I'm not going to project into that, is that hopefully the penalties aren't too deep and maybe they could stay below the second apron to avoid certain penalties like freezing the draft pick 7 years in the future. But for this core, honestly, it might be worth all that. All right, guys, that's everything I got. If you have any feedback, let me know in the comments. Do you think it's something that's possible? Do you think it's too unrealistic? I feel like a lot of you guys might say that. Let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Yossi Gazan. You can find all my previous work also under Yossi Gazan on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And check the description. I've got, as you can see in the top left corner, I've got the sports business classroom logo. I'm going to be an instructor there for the salary cap major, and you could check out what that program is. They still have spots available, and I'm having a promotion in the description. You could check it out. If you sign up with code Third Apron, get a lifetime subscription for the Third Apron newsletter.